Hi everyone. I wanted to talk to you today about something very, very fascinating, which is why so many Christians believe that global warming is not real, or at least anthropogenic climate change is not real. So that's the idea that, of course, humans are having the main effect on the climate system through releases of greenhouse gases. You'll find many Christians or self-described Christians denying the reality of that. And many of them also don't really take seriously the destruction that humanity is having on the earth. And that would seem to be a strange position to take if they really think that God created the earth and that we should be responsible stewards of the earth, right? Because God made the earth, so shouldn't we look after it? So therefore, why are they siding with corporations to be okay with pollution and climate change, right? The effects of climate change by denying those effects. So I'm going to talk about some reasons for this seeming contradiction, because it does seem strange on the surface, but once you dig a bit deeper into the nature of evangelism, it does become a bit clearer. Now, I'll link to an article that I wrote in my blog. It's just a few thoughts, but it basically just organizes what I think about the reasons for that, right? So one of the reasons is that there's a predominance of dominionism over custodianship. So within Christianity, there's this view called dominionism, which takes the earth to be a resource that people can just utilize and plunder, because God made it for us to do that, to be able to do that, okay? Whereas custodianship is more of a view that we should look after the earth because God made it, and we should, be good stewards and custodians of that, the beauty of the earth, etc., or the other creatures that live on it, and we should preserve it for the future. So there's kind of two different views here. One's more of a utilitarian notion. The other one is more of a kind of moral, maybe aesthetic, maybe spiritualist type of view. But again, unfortunately, dominionism seems to be, the dominant view, at least effectively, which is held by many evangelicals. Okay, so there's dominionism as a kind of entryway to that, and you can see that already sets up the conditions where people are going to be okay with pollution and climate change because, what's the big deal? If God made the earth for us, then shouldn't we use it as we see fit? Then there's a kind of eschatological issue, which is that many evangelists think that the world is gonna end, and that Christ is going to return. And so what is the point of looking after the earth, therefore, if the world is going to end and there's going to be a rapture where the true believers are going to be, taken up to heaven and everyone else is going to be left behind? So what is the motivation there to look after the earth if everyone's going to die and the Christians are just going to go to heaven anyway? So you can see how that would play out in terms of the indifference to climate change. In fact, I might even see a silver lining to climate change to the extent that they even believe in it, because they would see that as another signal or sign of a biblical prophetic fulfillment. So the Bible, the prophecy is coming true, and climate change is just another item in that bag of things which is happening. So we've got dominionism, we've got the eschatological aspect. There's also the fact that most evangelicals are just shockingly, and in fact many cases proudly ignorant and illiterate about science. Obviously that includes evolution. They're very hostile to the theory of evolution, but they're also hostile to the idea that the earth is billions of years old. So that's the old earth idea versus what they believe, which is the young earth notion, that the earth is just 6,000 years old. So it's not just that, though. There's also other areas of science which they tend to be quite hostile to, like vaccines, environmental science, and some other things. And they tend to get a lot of their so-called information from various grifters, like obviously just anti-science grifters on YouTube or other social media, but also creationist preachers, obviously. corporate propagandists, conspiracy theorists, and Christian or so-called Christian politicians who are going to say anything just to get the Christian evangelical base to act as a voting bloc for them, right? And this is especially the case if they couch their arguments in kind of good versus evil terms. So they can pit the Democrats as the bad guys or the devil, and that's the evil that the Christians have to fight against. So if these grifters and liars and propagandists couch it in those sorts of terms, they've got a even better chance of reaching the evangelicals. And abortion, obviously, which has been a major single-issue voting bloc type of thing in America for decades now, used by the Republican Party to mobilize and garner the support of millions and millions of American voters. And wokeness, this issue of wokeness, which has become a thing in the past decade or so, right? And secular authority. So many evangelicals think that there should be no separation of church and state, and that should be done away with, right? So again, if it can be couched in those sorts of terms, then these evangelicals will tend to see these things in a type of cosmic battle between good and evil. The next thing, and that sort of alludes to what I talked about with evolution, is that science, other areas of science which are tangentially or implicitly linked to with evolution and the idea of an old Earth, they're going to be rejected as well, such as Earth system science, which is the area of science which deals with how different parts of the Earth system, the atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, lithosphere, how they interact, how you get biogeochemical cycles, which is like the movement of elements and compounds, the sequestration of those elements and compounds, how they get released, the rates at which they get released, the thermodynamic effects, so that's going to affect the temperature of the planet, etc. Very complex area of science, obviously, but many people work on that, and they've got a pretty good handle on how a lot of it works. It's very important for understanding that because it does play into how we manage the environment, how we deal with pollution and climate change, etc. Large-scale planning by the government and business and society more generally. The energy debate, right? How are we going to get enough energy for the future? So that's extremely important to know about Earth system science, but that also tends to get shuttered by the evangelicals because it's implicitly tied to an old Earth and evolution. And since you can't have an old Earth and evolution, you also have to ditch Earth system science reality, right? So if science is wrong about that, then it also has to be wrong about climate change because it's linked to climate change. And so if climate change is fake news or is just liberal propaganda, then so is anthropogenic climate change, even more so, right? So that's also just tossed aside as a sham, and especially when Trump tells them that it's a sham. Now here Trump is kind of an interesting accelerant of this because 80% apparently of white evangelicals voted for Trump in the 2024 election. Now, why? Well, it's because Trump and MAGA, they cater to what these evangelicals want, which is obviously slogans and rhetoric, but also anti-abortion measures, anti-wokeness measures, attacks on the separation of church and state, things of that sort. So they're both getting a deal, or they're both getting something from this deal, right? And so if Trump tells them that climate change is fake, they're going to believe that, because otherwise why would God appoint Trump as president? And many of them believe that God chose Trump as his emissary on earth, even though Trump is the most sacrilegious, lying, racist, sexist, misogynist, grifting, corrupt president that we've ever had by far. Somehow they reconcile that though by saying that, God chose him because there's too much wokeness in America, or America is succumbing to liberal degeneracy, and abortion, etc., and Trump wants to stop that. So again, if Trump tells them something, they tend to believe it, even if it flies in the face of their own lived reality or what they see with their own eyes. These same Christians, they often support policies that benefit corporations, which are, incredibly powerful nowadays. And this process of corporate power concentration has been going on for decades, but it's really reached like the apogee now under Trump, especially his second term. They sort of align with a pro-corporate agenda, profit maximization, deregulation, attacks on unions, lowering worker wages or freezing worker wages, etc., for the benefit of corporations, while they punish and criminalize the very people that Jesus Christ told them to prioritize and help. So, in other words, the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, those people are going to be shunted to the side by these Christians in favor of the corporations. Even though Christ said that it's more likely for a poor person to go to heaven than a rich person. Now we've got like billionaires who own hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And they do all kinds of shady things, illegal activity, bending the government to their purposes, etc. But again, these Christians don't seem to really care about that, or at least they see it as less evil than what they're supposedly fighting against. So there's that, which seems very, very dissonant. If you were to think that they're really Christians who believe in the gospel, well, why are they helping corporations against the poor, against immigrants, etc.? Now, there's actually a kind of further layer to that, which is not just that Trump tells them to support this kind of robber baron capitalism, but also that there's a kind of redemptive value that they see to poverty and being marginalized, because it tells people that they are, they're being punished for their poor moral qualities or for being sinners or for not having enough personal responsibility. So if they're poor, then it's because they deserve to be poor. And they believe that, under the system, if you're rich, it's because you deserve to be rich, because you're hardworking, because you're industrious, you're innovative, etc., etc. And so this completely eviscerates any systemic analysis of people's experiences or their conditions. So it places everything at the feet of the individual, which is very much in line with the idea of original sin. And the Christian or the Christian evangelical notion of freedom is very much about so-called personal responsibility and free will. And so if you are able in the free market to become rich, it's because you deserve to be. And if you're poor, it's because you weren't moral enough or virtuous enough. So basically, it's sanctifying the system. If you're poor, it's because you didn't do enough for the system, and the system is ordained by God. And because he gave us our freedom and free will, we have a free market. Therefore, if you do well in that, then it's because you deserve to do well. And you were living by God's rules. Obviously, we know that that's complete garbage. There's many factors which come into wealth, including inheritance, including grifting, charging more interest, building shoddier products or services, making monopolies, buying politicians, lying, etc., etc. This is all documented voluminously. CEO pay has increased, I think, 1,085% since the 1960s. It's not because they're doing 1,085% of a better job. Being inclined to worship Trump's wealth more than the gospel. So Trump can do almost literally anything by now, and they'll still see that as more virtuous than the gospel, effectively. So, Trump's Bitcoin scams, his use of the office of president of the United States to enrich himself and his family and his circle, the way that he distorts the market, even though they call themselves free market, they're actually the furthest thing from that. They're actually corporatists and oligarchs. They don't really believe in capitalism. They believe in a type of oligarchic neo-feudalism in which the super rich can rig the system in any way that they want to keep extraction going, where the working and middle classes are fleeced and more wealth flows upwards to this tiny little stratum of society. And that's the stratum that these Christian evangelicals favor and keep empowering. And you see this very clearly as well with Elon Musk and Doge, right? When Musk did his little illegal Doge thing, he destroyed USAID, which was actually very, very important part of American soft power. And it was buying a lot of goodwill for the US government by feeding millions of starving people, preventing them from dying from various diseases, etc. And making America look basically like a force for good by doing that humanitarian work. And Musk and Trump destroyed that because Musk is basically a genocidal racist who doesn't think that poor brown and black people should even be allowed to live. He sees them as superfluous, or as the Nazis would say, useless eaters. That was the term that they used to describe the so-called Untermenschen or subhumans. And he's just replaying that playbook. Now, the Christian evangelicals, they largely supported Musk, even though Musk really hates humanity in general. He's actually a transhuman psychopath. Now, transhumanism in and of itself is not good or bad. It's just like a projection about where technology might lead us with further integration with humans. But depending on who's wielding it and how it's used, it can be very, very evil. And Musk thinks that certain categories of people don't deserve to even live, and that they don't deserve to be ascended or uplifted by technology in the future. So those people are going to be exterminated, whether through starvation, disease, war. It doesn't matter to him. In fact, he probably sees it as quite funny that they are starving painfully. And many Christians, unfortunately, think the same way, or at least they are indifferent to that suffering. Again, these are the people who Christ said that we should help, right? But these are the people being stomped on by Trump and Musk. So there's that as well. This kind of celebration of cruelty, or this toleration of cruelty, and really genocide, if you think about it. Now, this also ties into the Christian Zionist obsession with Israel. Why do they support Israel? Now, America has long supported Israel. It's partly because of foreign policy objectives about what they think of as stability in the Middle East, having an ally with values which we share, etc. But there's also a religious eschatological aspect, which is about how Israel is seen by evangelicals, or many of them, as part of the biblical prophetic fulfillment of the end of days. So in this view, it's not really about solidarity with Jewish people or concerns about their rights or their having a place to live. It's about seeing them as pawns in a larger cosmic play. Okay, and in fact, many of the evangelicals think that 2/3 of Jews will die in these tribulations, and that 1/3 will convert to Christianity. So there's already a kind of implicitly anti-Jewish thing happening, even as they affirm the state of Israel, right? So this is an example of how religion is used to marshal support for certain foreign policy objectives and to sanctify it. And of course, Trump has made a big hay about supporting Israel. He's actually threatened to, I think he backed away from this, but he threatened to take away FEMA and other funding from cities which do BDS, which is boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel because of its policies in Gaza. And he's been very, very pro-Israel way more, I think, than any other administration in US history. There's also the aspect of that Christians, or evangelical, I keep saying Christians, but I really mean evangelical Christians and fundamentalists and Christian nationalists, they want to, or they're obsessed with the question of reproduction and demographics. Many of them subscribe to the Great Replacement theory, which is about how white people are supposedly going to be replaced in the future, and that there's going to be a white genocide against white people. And Musk, he caters to that belief on Twitter. He amplifies those views and kind of whips up this hatred and scaremongering around that. But many evangelicals, they're obsessed with reproduction and controlling women's bodies and having more and more children. Now think about how that actually ties into economics, right? More people equals more workers. More workers is more profit for corporations. More profit for corporations is what the corporatists want. And so again, they're using religion to shape the society in a way which serves their interests. Many evangelicals believe that the federal government, when it does anything to help somebody else, that's socialism and tyranny. Because like taxpayer money is being taken from them to give to somebody else to help somebody, some other group, right? And so especially if they are conditioned with racist propaganda, they're going to see that as socialism and tyranny. These are tropes which the Ku Klux Klan uses, other white nationalists and racists use to oppose federal programs that help Black Americans, etc. And so their view of freedom is, and the Constitution is that it should apply to them. They should have freedom and prosperity, but if it extends to other people, especially if the federal government is involved, then that is a crime against them, against the evangelicals, right? So again, if you think about deregulation, reducing regulatory oversight, reducing certain costs in government because you're getting rid of agencies which oversee corporate fraud or punish corporate fraud, etc., or look after the environment, then that's going to be seen as socialism. And so getting rid of that is good, according to the corporatists and the evangelicals. Opposition to liberation theology. This is really fascinating. This is to do with Latin America during the Cold War. Now, in Latin America, that had been traditionally ruled by large landowners and companies, often foreign capital like American companies, and authoritarian and military regimes, which were often backed by the United States. Now, liberation theology tried to oppose that by raising the consciousness and organization of the peasants and workers and trying to get more rights and more land for them, and tying that with Christ's message about helping the poor. Now, the US government didn't like that because they saw it as tied to communist movements, and so Protestant evangelism was used as a tool to counteract that ideologically. And so the CIA used that. They helped certain evangelical groups and missionaries to go in there into Latin America to try to oppose liberation theology. And of course, they indoctrinated the peasants and workers to see things from the point of view of the landowners and big capital and the military dictators and leaders of the continent, okay, to oppose liberation theology. So keeping the machine going in favor of corporatism. And really, Christian evangelism in America since the 50s, 60s has really been a capitalist or at least a corporatist construct. Large amounts of money flowing to various think tanks and foundations representing corporate and also right-wing religious viewpoints like Family First and what's the other one with Jerry Falwell? The Moral Majority. But, Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, ALEC, which is the American Legislative Economic Council. These different foundations playing the legislative pipeline or the judicial pipeline. And then you've got the religious organizations trying to reshape culture, education, the law, etc. They're kind of fusing together. A lot of that was backed up with big money because the certain capitalists and investors saw the benefits that they would accrue if they could have this big voting bloc which would vote for the GOP on these issues, because they knew that they would get what they wanted during the elections, right? So single issues like abortion were really catered to. That became like a wedge issue. And so you can mobilize this vast block of voters to vote for the GOP and by extension vote for the pro-corporate agenda. And we saw that under Reagan a lot. So Reagan really represented the counterattack against the New Deal. And it really helped to weaken unions, worker solidarity, and the virtuous cycle that had been in place since FDR. The corporatists wanted to intensify extraction in the United States, and they use religion as a tool in that toolkit. Okay, so this is kind of like the broad overview of how it is that evangelicals, fundamentalists, Christian nationalists come to deny anthropogenic climate change, how they could see it as a demonic ideology or something which is made up by liberals and the left, and how they're manipulated by really small groups of people pushing for more corporate profit and control. Anyway, that's kind of the ideas there. Let me know what you think, and thanks for listening. Thank you.